What up? It is your boy Robin Black, downtown Toronto studio. We are talking about George St-Pierre and Nate Diaz. So it's sort of midweek as we're getting into mid-May, early May, I guess. And so, I've been knee deep. If I was Brendan Schaub, I'd say balls deep in doing these 1 minute breakdowns. What up, Brendan? We love you. Joe? This is empty. I'm drinking my coffee out of here because something's scraping off the bottom in this, and I don't know what it's made out of, so I'm a little sketched out. I'm going to have to ask Joe for another one. So yeah, people are like, George St-Pierre, Nate Diaz. I do like iced coffee. And I'm like, come on, yeah, okay, whatever. People say a lot of shit. And we've talked about this a lot, briefly. When you realize... when you watch the news or politics or sports or entertainment or whatever, the medium of television and news, people use it for their own purposes, like saying things that will sell them something or get you to act in a certain behavior or whatever. A lot of the time, you should be politely and not negatively or paranoidly, Eddie, I'm looking at you, suspicious of news and of these things. Why would somebody related to the UFC lie and say, a fight is on? Well, one, they could be selling you something, or two, they could actually be gauging audience behavior, audience reaction, metrics to a fight to gauge how much value it can have, because they can do this kind of math, analytics, and then figure out how much it's worth paying people. So they can do things. There's a lot of reasons. So I kind of assumed, because of any of those reasons, that this is probably nonsense until I started to sniff around friends that George and I have in common and people that I'm quite close to that train with him or train him or involved with him. And even little bits of conversation I've had with George himself, who is a good, very good man and a very cool guy and very generous. And none of these people are liars. So when nothing is happening, they'll be like, oh, get serious, man. The people say stupid shit all the time. And that is not uncommon. You hear something about George and they're like, oh, God, and they're fairly straightforward. For, you should be suspicious of things, but over time, personal experience would tell you, I don't necessarily believe what a major politician tells me, yet in my experience, for us, a hobby has always been straight with me. So you're trying to take it on this. So these guys are all being a little bit general and avoidy about this conversation because they're not liars. If they were more comfortable with lying, they would say things like, this is not happening, bro, or no, we are not in discussions or whatever. And instead they're saying stuff like, oh, nothing's signed. People who tell the truth want to tell you nothing signed. And then you say, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, well, there's always a lot of things going on. And all of these behaviors lead me to believe, actually, there's something fucking going on. Doesn't mean it'll happen. Doesn't mean it will happen. We've all known people who apparently they were getting married. Oh, cool, they're engaged, they're getting married. Somehow it doesn't happen. We've all known people, it's like, oh, you're going to get this job, doesn't happen. We've seen people make offers on houses, doesn't happen. We've seen fights that were in discussion, they don't happen. What do all these things have in common? Many moving parts. You ask a girl to marry you, she says yes. You got to still make her like you. I guess it's not well phrased. Still be kind and nice and somebody someone would like and appreciate and love. From now till then, you have to actually execute a wedding, and there's a lot of steps. And this is no different, Yes, we're talking about, they still didn't even say that, but my feeling is this is so. And you hear other people who are talking to people at Diaz and people connected to George and people connected to the UFC, and they're like, yeah, this conversation's actually happening. Conversation doesn't mean it will happen. George, for one, could say, yep, I like everything. And Diaz could be like, no, bro, I want $5 million more than you're offering me. And then maybe it doesn't happen. Millions of moving parts. Having said that, let's talk about this fight. We'll talk about a few topics. The fight itself, the dynamic of the fight itself, let's leave that to last because that's my favorite part. So we can spend as much time as we want on that. Quickly, we'll talk about weight. And let's talk about that first. So when something like this happens, human behavior is very easy to predict. When I put out a piece on Vitor Belfort, we were having a conversation and it's coming out, and we said, what do you think the most frequent comment will be? And it will be something about TRT, because people are easy to predict. They will go with the most. You can predict their behavior. You can watch their thought pattern take shape. And people will be like, what? George was just 185 pounds. You mean to tell me he's fighting at 155? And then you'll hear things like, that's crazy. Or, I'm not comfortable with that. Or, I'm not sure about that. Okay? But George wouldn't do it unless he was sure. And that's going to be the most important part. Diaz is quite big, but he's made 155 in the past. He knows how to do it, even if his body has changed or whatever. Those guys like to go out and burn calories, and he'd be fine. But George, that will be the conversation. Dude just fought at 185. I was around him a lot. We made a documentary. I think you can still see it maybe on tsn.ca/UFC. And it's been spread around to a number of places. I think not Netflix, but one of those other ones, the Canadian ones, they have it too. Crackle? Yeah, I think it could be Crackle. I know in America, you're like, you guys got something called Crackle? Or the rest of the world? But yes, it's like orange and it looks like Netflix. Anyways, it's out there. So I spent a lot of time with him, and he was pretty big. And I would see him doing strength and conditioning stuff, but he had to eat 6 and 7 times a day just to stay there. Side note, if George fights at 185 and in under a year fights at 155, the whole cyborg can't make the weight thing that conversation's got to be done at that point, right? Like once you see a guy do that. Here's the thing. To be 185 pounds on fight night, George wanted to be 200 to 205. He might have even been bigger on fight night once you carb load it up. These are just ways to trick the human body, but he wants to be over 200 pounds. For George to be over 200 pounds, he must aggressively feed his body food, more than he wanted to. In fact, he told me personally, and I'm sure it was reported elsewhere, that the colitis was, he believed, and his doctor believed, and one possibility was force feeding himself to eat so much protein. That has an effect on your digestive system. He had to aggressively force himself to consume that much food. So as soon as you stop that, you start going back down to normal. You start becoming closer to his walking around weight. When he fought at 170 was 185. So also, when we have this discussion, we can compare fighting weight to fighting weight, which was 85 to 55, or we can compare walking around weight, so non-weight cutting, not weigh-in day, which for 185 for George was 205, and for 155 would be about 175. So Kevin Lee is over 175 pounds right now. And he gets he's a big one, big 55er. He gets to 55. But he missed once or more. Kevin missed the last one, right? Kevin missed his last. And he missed. So he wasn't going to win that title, whether he won or not.
I think not.
Yeah.
Just initially,
But I think he made it. Yeah, he made it. But he's a big 155er. There are others. Gleason Tebow. I'm like, that's a big dude. So they are 175 to 180, and then through the wonders of weight management and dehydration and weight cutting, they will achieve 155 pounds. So to recap, 155-pound George St-Pierre is 180. That's what he is. That's imaginary George is. And 185-pound champion George is 205. That means he has to lose 25 pounds. And just by reducing that food intake, he probably lost 10 to 15, which means he only has to lose 10 pounds. I know it sounds crazy, but once you start adding, subtracting, force feeding to gain up, and then weight cutting to gain down, as insane as it is, to fight 30 pounds lighter, you only actually have to work hard to lose 10 or 15 pounds. How's that possible? Because now we've removed the forced feeding. And once the force feeding is removed, the weight already drops. Okay? Anyways, that's the long and the short of it. That's the simple details. That's just the math, the poundage. The complex details of managing these weights and doing it in a healthy way. There are many experts at it. The very finest from all the reputation, when you talk to the best of the best, is a gentleman by the name of George Lockhart. And Firas, his brother Eamon, everybody on their team, and George are all huge fans of this man's work. It's a high level of science, and none of them would ever accept this unless they knew they could do it, and not only do it pretty well, but perform at near optimum. So I know this is just one guy sharing his insight. And it's not easy insight to pass on. When you're like, well, George only has to, when you tell one of your friends, George only has to actually lose 10 pounds, they're like, you don't know how to do math. 185 minus 55 is 30 pounds. The nature of the automatic drop by not force feeding yourself to maintain high, and then the additional weight cutting by using George and other expertise, George Lockhart, to be able to do it. George only has to walk around at 180. And to make 155. His walking around weight will be 180. There will be carb, depletion and stuff happening weeks out, and then there'll be dehydration the week of, but he can do it at 180. And he was only 205 to fight at 85. And once he stopped eating so aggressively, he was probably only 190, 195. So it's not as much as it appears, through the tricks of how we trick our body. Anyways, so that's that. What did we talk about? The fact that this fight's actually being discussed, it seems. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's being discussed. And 2, the weight thing, which people will obsess about. Do your best to point form, make them see that it's not as simple as they see once you use advanced science and strategic weight management. It's different, and they'll do it. Also, quick thought. We had a long conversation, if you spend time with us, on any regular basis, about Frankie Edgar coming back after being knocked out. And it was a very similar thing. And I think this is a valuable thing for all of us. So it's a little side note of hoping to bring value in our thinking is we see, all the scientists of the highest level using a massive amount of education and a specialized knowledge say Frankie can come back. And you're like, yeah, but I got a feeling is like he's not. Advanced science specialists dedicating their life to it versus your feeling, this is where you go. And it's going to be a similar conversation when you have this with people, and you'll be like, look, we've got a guy who's dedicated his life to looking at this, and he's passing on the information taken from people dedicated to their life to doing this, versus you're like, yeah, bro, but nobody, that feels like too much. I'm not real. I don't feel good about George. George has to feel good. You don't. But these are good chances to start to really look at. Fighting is a lens through which we can view anything. And we do this a lot in our lives. We'll look at some kind of expertise, and then we'll be like, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound right because we don't have the layers of knowledge. And it doesn't sound like something that would be controversial, but you see people argue, and there may even be arguments here about how knowledge and science is stupid and how it's mostly bullshit. And the only people who say that are people who are missing knowledge and science. So don't be one of those people. Look for truths and evidence wherever you can find it, and see that most complex things, when broken down into smaller details, can be understood, which will take us to the fight. A lot of people ask me about I'm doing these 1-minute breakdowns on Instagram and on this YouTube channel, but also on Twitter. I'm at Robin Black MMA on both of those. And people have been really liking them, and I've been really enjoying them. And people will say, how do you know this stuff? Or can you show me how to watch fights and see this? And it's like, it's just a lot of work. It's just a long time of doing something that you love. And if you do it long enough, you gain knowledge. And most of the time when you've gained some type of discernible knowledge, the very first thing you realize, and it's a very valuable thing, is you look back and you go, wow, I remember what it was like to not know this. And I didn't know whatever this is, whatever the knowledge that you're talking about is, even existed. So it could be easy for me to say, well, medical doctors are stupid, since I don't know what they do. Or I could say, oh, bullshit, that guy can't lose 30 pounds when I don't understand it. Or I can say, Frankie, he shouldn't be back in there, bro. I saw what happened at Bisping. But this is a scientist, right? And I'm not saying scientists are the be all and end all, but dedicating your life to learning something is really accomplishing a lot for you, which is something that Nate Diaz and George St-Pierre have done with fighting, with all the things around fighting. They've dedicated their lives to it. But they've done it in very different ways. Heuristics is a type of learning what feels connected, like a similar answer to use to solve a problem. And Nate Diaz is and Nick Diaz, and these guys who use feeling and instinct and refine their instincts. They're hard to fucking fight. They're hard to compete with on something because they create different truths. And truth, this is another one of those weird controversial things, but when you see news and two news channels are saying the opposite thing, on some level, each one is truth because it's their truth. Nate Diaz's truth is fuck you. My jiu-jitsu is better than your stupid wrestling. Wrestling's for fucking round winners. Pride would be better because it's about fucking finishing guys. And all of that is true for him. All of it is true. And it's like, it matters who's tougher. And it doesn't matter what, you think. And George is just an athlete, but I'm an animal and a fighter. And that's true for him. That's true for him. And man, with with my jiu-jitsu game, I can fucking submit that guy. And that is true for him. He's not going in there thinking he can't submit George. Is he thinking he can't out-wrestle George? Maybe not, because fucking Nate don't care about none of that. But even if he's like, because he's not also delusional, he's fucking brilliant in his own right. Somebody says, you got to watch George take you down. If he accepts that concept, he'll be like, I'll fucking submit him off. I'm swearing a lot, but this is part of how they roughly interface with the world. I was chatting about swearing on Twitter with some friends, and they were talking about how it is the judgment against this language is the snoot of the rich, because this is the white collar or this is the blue collar language. This is the language of the working people. And fuck, did I like that thought. It's like that it is the arrogance of the wealthy that tried to like refine and own language and say what people should and shouldn't say. Fuck that. Say what feels right. Nobody owns language. And when they say that a particular word is bad or evil or shouldn't be used or negative, they've just given it power. So if these people are going to give it power, use it. But yeah, Nate, these things are true for him. So he'll be like, I will submit him. And this dynamic, this fighting dynamic, is something that has been at play heavily lately. It's something we've been watching for. It's something we've been, fortunate enough, excited to talk about for the last couple of years, because anybody in the know, anybody who's looking at things in terms of pattern recognition and systems analysis knows that this was coming. The dynamic between taking somebody who can out-wrestle you and working the game of getting back to guard and beating them there. Dylan Dennis just pulled guard the other weekend, and now there's a substantial difference in levels. Tony Ferguson approached the fight with Khabib from the point of view that he was going to fight him from guard. Okay? Which I hope we get to see one day. No, there's no definitive right or wrong. If you love Khabib Nurmagomedov, you're like, he will destroy him. And if you love Tony, he doesn't have as many fans, judging by the metrics of social media, but those that do. And they're not as rabid as my friends in Russia who fucking love Khabib. But Tony's people will be like, and the jiu-jitsu people too, because they've got to invest. They're invested in this. Is like, no. Jiu-jitsu has been undervalued and misunderstood for the last half decade in fighting. And people made a mistake by getting away from attacking from the wrestler from guard and looking to submit them. it got hard. Got hard for a while there. They got in, controlled your biceps, and beat you up, and all of a sudden, some people who just couldn't grasp the long-term thinking, the idea that that's okay, we'll work our way through it and we'll find the answers, they bailed. And they said, the guard is dead, we will only stand up here, which played right into the wrestler's hands. Because to stand up, what do you have to do? You have to wrestle. How do I get from the ground to standing up? I must wrestle my way up. They played right into their hands. The answer to this guy's a better wrestler than me is not, I better wrestle him. It's never been that. The answer to this guy's a better kickboxer is, I better kickbox him. It's never been that. That has never been at play in martial arts. The answer is, fuck that. I will submit him, or I will hurt him, or I will beat him with my game that I am better. And that's what Nate will believe. And it'll be dynamic. It'll be like exciting. It'll be thrilling to see this. Not only in this potential fight, which may or may not happen, but in many of this, because this conflict, this friction is going to play out over the next year or two. Tony went and twisted his knee. And before that, Khabib, tiramisu or whatever that whole shtick was. We didn't get to see it there. And there it's a good one. That's a nice one. That's a good one. But this is a good one too. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm an immense Nate Diaz fan. Always will be. I got Diaz shirts around here. You know how many George St-Pierre shirts I have? I have 0. I have 0, but I have some Diaz shirts. But George is a friend. He's a true friend, not one of these like, I know this guy when I see him, and he admits for me once. George and I have known each other for a long time, and he welcomed me to go and shoot a documentary with him. So he's a true friend of mine. And I admire him. And I've learned a lot from studying him. A lot. Not just about fighting, although through the lens of fighting, you learn about life itself. But so George is my friend. And so I'm going to play devil's advocate. And here's the scary part, is you should fucking see George really just play jiu-jitsu. We said Dylan Dennis the other day submitted this guy. Gary Tonin, if you don't know who he is, you probably do. You're not hanging out on a YouTube channel talking about fights if you don't know Gary Tonin. But if you don't, or for your friends who don't, who are looking over your shoulder, he fights in one championship, and he trains underneath the great Professor Danaher. And he went and won his fight. And you know what he did? He didn't pull guard. He fucking drilled this guy with the right hand, and then he ripped him to the ground. He got on top of him and beat the shit out of him. Because Professor Danaher and their whole team has traded that knowledge. They didn't just, they've traded it. Dylan Dennis has really sought to trade that with Conor McGregor and Straight Blast Gym and whatever, but he didn't show that. Gary Tonin did. And George rolls with Gary Tonin, and he rolls with Gordon Ryan, and he trains with the Danaher Death Squad, and he is a badass in jiu-jitsu. I am not. I am a jiu-jitsu enthusiast. I've trained jiu-jitsu since 2007. I won 4 MMA fights, and they were all by submission. One of them was submission due to strikes because his ear exploded. But I am not. I'm the last belt they gave me, which was around 2009, was a blue belt, and they put a couple stripes on it, and I never wore a gi again. I am nowhere in this caliber. So, this is not meant as a comparison, because I am somewhere between that and people who don't know jiu-jitsu. I'm closer down here than I am to those people. But I got to roll with George, and I've got to roll with him. You wouldn't believe it. And so I'm not comparing me to him. That's just millions of miles apart. But I can compare him to other great players that I have rolled with. And understand, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but this is all I do every day for more than a decade, is analyze martial arts. So I have some insight into what's going on. He's a motherfucker. Like, skill-wise, but also then he understands how to use his physicality. And there are moments where not only is he now rolling, controlling your chin and just clowning you, But then he'll play the physical game for a moment where it's just the body uses its athleticism, but also its mechanical efficiency. There are positions you can lock your body into. If I lean against this thing, it doesn't matter how hard it pushes back. I've made this, physiologically strong thing. When you frame something, you frame your arm on something, this is incredibly strong. So he would use his physicality, he would use his technical skills, and then you would feel him understanding his body, of course, to that level. It's just, you feel like a little child, right? I also had the great fortune, while I'm giving personal stories in hopes of it giving us some reference point, I had the good fortune of Professor Danaher was going to show me some things for TSN when we were shooting in New York City, and he brought Gary Tonin and Gordon Ryan together to be able to show me. It was magical. And thank you, Professor Danaher, for that. And I'm going to go and shadow him a little bit more in the future. But man, they can play jiu-jitsu, So we're gonna play this game a little bit of, the old school approach because these are old school fighters in their own ways, as much as, they also are masters, we're going to try to compare some of these attributes, right? George's game of understanding the truth of wrestling is very powerful. So let's say we're on the ground. That's Diaz's approach. I want to submit him. The scary part, and I'm saying this from a point of view of somebody who admires George, although I am an immense Nate and Nick Diaz fan as well, is George can play that game with them. Then when George goes to drag you to the ground, that starts with a standing wrestling game. And my opinion now, and you see it, Dylan, Dan, again, it's the same list of people, but you'll see way more of this. Rather than fight it, accept it, and use the path to the ground to get yourself into a really advantageous position to attack. Guard, or even guard with an advantage, an angle advantage, or on the right hip, or whatever you're looking for, or a grip advantage. I think Nate will do that, or try to access George's back. He has some really interesting games to access the back. And then fights start out in the field. We know how Nate likes to play. George's best moment of his last few years, he took a few years off, but even the last few fights before that break was when he dug in to fight Bisping, which he was capable of doing because he owned it outside for long enough, and he's really good there. Again, personal experience, and very, very thankful, grateful that I got it. I got to play point karate with George and a couple of masters that he brought in and has been training with them for years. And when you see how he moves out there, cat-like movement out there, that's a long-range Diaz game that he likes to play out there. George is really good out there. If he can be winning the fight out there, that's really hard for Nate. And Nate has to start getting aggressively moving in and trying to find his way into even pulling guard or dragging George down or accessing his back. So George is really frightening. He's a frightening, incredible super athlete who is obsessed with every detail of free fighting. Nate Diaz is an unbreakable, scary, bad motherfucker who is a master of jiu-jitsu, and a really, 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 even the people who appreciate him, even the way you've heard him described, massively underappreciated in his boxing game. And I say that even where as a fan, people will say, "Oh, Nate Diaz, you should see him with boxers," or you'll hear a little bit of sort of a hyping of Nate's boxing game. Even when you hear that, really understated. He is better, cleaner, quicker, smarter, understands the feel of the game out in the chaos. I mean, Diaz brothers live in chaos. That's why they thrive. And that's the key to it. I don't know how many times you need to see upsets or people that people think are going to lose win, but Nate Diaz can win this fight. And in particular, the approach is make it chaotic. George is somebody who likes order. George is somebody who likes organization. He likes it laid out and strategized. He doesn't like to make rash decisions. Force him to do that. He can win this fight. Of course, George is a favorite. He's the 170-pound champion and the 185-pound champion. He's a super athlete. He's George St-Pierre. He's lost twice ever, and then he murdered both of those guys after. You know, of course he's the favorite. But don't for a second think that there's anyone on earth that when Nate Diaz fights them, Nate Diaz can't beat them. That is crazy. And if anybody says that to you, you know that you have the full authority to tell them that they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. I don't know if this fight's going to happen, but I can tell you that I'm honestly very excited at the prospect. I'm going to Singapore next week, and so I'm going to shoot some things with Mark before I go. But if anything happens with this while I'm gone, I will come up right here live on YouTube from my hotel. There's a really nice rooftop pool, Mark. I'll show you. It's fucking sick. One Championship. You guys know One Championship? The owner of One Championship, Shatri Siddhiatong, is bringing me to meet with their team to discuss doing commentary and analysis for them. It's my honor to go, and then I'm going to get to go to their show. And it's something I will truly consider, because a lot of I have an uphill battle every time I want to talk about and not to you guys, and not on Instagram and not on Twitter, but with the machine. Every time I want to talk about art and elegance and beauty and the poetry and all of these truths about fighting, the machine here in North America wants it to be a spectacle and at best a sport. And I love it, but what I see is true. And over at One Championship, they see it the way that we do. They see it as beauty and art, as a true art form. And there, I'm not some weirdo. I'm just part of that family. So I'm going there, honored to be there, and I'm going to listen to them very seriously. But hey, like I said, if I'm over there and I will make the time. If there's anything happening with this, we got to revisit it. And if it hasn't happened by the time I get back, but it's still being discussed, Mark and I will make another video right here in 8 or 10 days or whenever I'm back. Thank you guys so much for spending your time with me. I really, really, truly mean that. Please follow me on Instagram at RobinBlackMMA and Twitter at RobinBlackMMA. Mark is going to make a fan page on Facebook, which will allow us to share some different things, I think. So please watch for that. I just have a regular Facebook page right now. And please go consider buying some t-shirts at shoprobinblack.com. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it big time. And until next time, enjoy the hostilities, my friends.